right here as we're sitting in this place, there is spiritual warfare that is going on, and every single one of us is on a battlefield. There's not a person that's here this morning that isn't dealing with a war-type scenario in our heart, in our mind, on some level. And we need to, as Christians, we need to be able to learn how to gain the victory and maintain the victory so that we are able to do what God has called us to do and have that joy that God promises us in our lives, even though we're in the middle of the battle. So let's look at this morning, making war in the heavenlies. I want you to think about this as we look at prayer and fasting as well. Ephesians 6, verses 10 through 13, the Word of God says this: "Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the wiles or the tricks, the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, and against rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand." Let's think first of all this morning about life's battlefields. In August of 2023, there was an article that was entitled, "Winning the Battle of Your Mind." It was written by Megan Mullinger, and she writes, "Have you ever played that game, Two Truths and a Lie?" I've never heard of it before I read this, but I guess it's a game that people play, Two Truths and a Lie. She goes on to explain it. "You present 3 statements about yourself. 2 are true and 1 is a lie. Then everyone tries to guess which statement is false. Over the years, I've noticed that people who are really good at this game are the ones that tell simple lies, not over the top. I won the lottery this year, that lie is obvious and it always fails. But the seemingly normal, everyday lies, nobody ever second guesses. The same goes for self-talk." So she switches, she's talking about a game, but then she switches to how we operate in our own lives. She says, "Our minds are a battlefield of affirmation and deception, but it's hard to discern what's true and what isn't." She goes on in the article to talk about how a lot of times we will tell ourselves some truth and then we tell ourselves lies. And we're constantly going back and forth. I'm good, I'm not good. I'm okay, I'm not okay. And she's describing that inner turmoil, that inner battle that we all face about where we are in life and what we're dealing with and how we're coping with the things that we're facing in our lives. Like I said earlier, every one of us sitting here this morning is at war. It's a war of good and evil. It's a war of light and dark. Everyone's battlefield and everyone's enemy looks a little different, though. We all face different things. We'll actually face different things as we go through different phases of life, right? I'm battling with things today that I never battled with before in my past. And there are things that I battled with in my past that are non-issues today because they're just not things that I have to worry about anymore. I've gotten through a phase of life. So every one of us at different times and at different stages, we're going to battle with different things. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 11 warns us not to be outwitted by Satan, like not to let the devil trick us or to cause us to fall into traps. It goes on to say that we shouldn't be ignorant of his designs. The devil has designed certain things for us to fight with. He's attacked us in certain ways in the past, and he'll come and attack us again in that same way until we can get the victory over it, until we start to see, man, I've been down this road before, and I don't want to go there again. I'm going to try a different way. I'm going to do something different. For one person, the battle may be pride and narcissism. And sitting right next to that person, someone else might be battling with insecurity and the issues of people pleasing. For another, the battle is with lust for power and success. They're pressing, they're grasping at that. I need power, I need success, so that I can feel like I'm accomplishing in my life. While another person battles with sexual lust and the need for control. For some other people, it's just that they're reacting to life. And in that, they're feeling overwhelmed, they're feeling exhausted, feeling like they can never get ahead or get in front of things. And they're always battling with this, I can't get enough, I can't make enough, I can't seem to get the upper hand. When am I going to catch a break? And there's a battle that's there of insecurity and feeling like you're failing all the time. You know, these are all battles that are rooted in the supernatural and the spiritual. And these are spiritual battles that are playing out in the present, yes. But listen, they have eternal outcomes. How we handle the battles that we're facing today will determine where we spend eternity. Quite often, how our children will look at and view and serve God. How our families will be impacted for the things of God. Those are the things that are playing or weighing in the balance of the battlefields of our lives. Verse 12, we read, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and against powers and against the rulers of darkness." He's saying these battles that we're facing are quite often unseen. There are things that are going on in our minds and in our emotions and in our spirits. And we're battling these wickedness and the heaviness of it and the demonic. We're wrestling with these temptations and tensions of life. And in that, we can make the wrong decision if we're not careful. For other people, they're wrestling or battling the things of the past. You know, there's not too many people over the age of 20 that don't have some kind of regret in life. Right? We've all made mistakes. We've all said hurtful things, done hurtful things, and we end up with regrets. And that's, when we talk about this spiritually, the Bible says in Romans 3:23, "For we've all sinned, and we've all fallen short of the glory of God." And there's that wrestling. That's the tension that we have in the present, actually about the past. And we can be living today, but fighting battles of things that took place years ago. Those are battles that, yes, they're in the past, but if we're not careful, they can dominate and control today. For some, the topic of the past isn't about things that you chose to say or things that you chose to do. Sometimes when people think about the past, there's a battleground there because of things that were said to them, or said about them, or even done to them. So there are some people, when they think about the past, there is nothing good that comes to mind. It is hurt, it is pain, it is brokenness, and that's a battleground. For other people, their battleground is between them and God. And you're going to come in contact with, and you might even be in the midst of a battle between you and God right now. And quite often, many times, this begins with events that we don't understand, or that events that we can't find a purpose for. Like, God, what just happened to me? I don't have a file for that. I can't put that into a category of why it happened or what caused that, what the purpose of that was. For some, these battles are just way too intense. And a lot of times the battles with God almost always revolve around the question of why. In Psalms 88, verse 14, the psalmist writes, "Lord, why do you cast off my soul? Why do you hide your face from me?" So here the psalmist, he's being very transparent and he's writing about this. God, I don't understand what's going on. The why question is a scary question, right? Because there's a reason it's being asked. Why did you let this happen, God? Why did you take my loved one away from me, God? Why didn't you heal or deliver my loved one? Why didn't you change the outcome of this situation? God, it was in your power. I believe that you could do anything, but God, why didn't you? And those questions, as a pastor, the why questions are quite often the most obvious ones. Something happened, we don't understand, so the why question comes. It's an obvious question. But there's a lot of times They're the most difficult question because there's not a clear-cut answer in the here and now. Sometimes it just doesn't make sense. Personally, I too, like the person that's asking the why questions, I have to make a choice. Because when people come to me as a pastor and say, Pastor, why did this? I have to wrestle through those issues just like you do. I don't know why. And then God, why did you allow that hurt, that pain, that violation? God, why did you allow that to play out the way that it did? And I have to choose, just like the person that's asking why, I have to choose to trust God. I don't know why, but I'm going to trust that God has a plan. In Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9, it tells us that God's thoughts are not like our thoughts, and that God's ways are not like our ways. And what that means is that God sees things that we don't see. God understands things that we don't understand. Maybe God had to take that person home to be with them because they were right with God at that time, but God knew that if He let time pass, they may not serve Jesus over the long haul. There's things in life where some of these questions are very deep waters, right? And they don't make sense when you're in the middle of it. But God, knowing the beginning from the end, we must walk in faith. We must believe that God has a purpose of allowing things to play out in our lives, even if we are being brought to that place where we got to walk through the valley of darkness. God, I can't see what my next step should be, but I'm going to trust you that you're going to be there with me, that you're going to help me through it, that there is a purpose on the other side of this, that when I get through it, you're going to be there helping me along the way. This brings us secondly to the fog of war. Now there's a military term, and it's literally the fog of war. It's a phrase that is used to describe what it's like for a soldier to be in the battle, on the battlefield, in the middle of the fight. And it's described as this: it's the uncertainty in situational awareness experienced by people in active military operations. The term speaks or seeks to capture the uncertainty regarding one's own capability, adversarial capabilities, and adversarial's intent during an engagement, operation, or campaign. What it's talking about is that when you are in the middle of the battle, a lot of times you are not able to see clearly. You can't see what the next move should be. Things are obscured. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of chaos. That is the fog of war. And when people get into that scenario, you've probably seen when people are in a fight on the street, right? They just start throwing wildly. And I actually saw like a self-defense video the other day where this guy was just swinging wildly. He was being attacked, and as he was swinging, he had his head down and he was just throwing punches. And some totally innocent girl just walked around the corner and she caught one of his punches. He didn't mean to do that, but the fog of war, right? In the middle of that, there was something that was done that was unintentional. In 1 Samuel chapter 14, verse 20, we read about King Saul and his men. They're going out to battle against the Philistines. And as they come in contact with the Philistine army, it says this: and behold, every Philistine sword was against his neighbor, and there was great confusion. What this is describing is as Saul and his men got to the battlefield, the Philistines were they had their swords out and they were fighting, but they were fighting each other. Brother against brother, comrade against comrade. Have you ever been there before? It's like people say, same team. Like you're fighting the person that you're supposed to be working with. You're coming against them. And this is what the fog of war does. And right here, this army in the middle of the battle, they were so confused that they were fighting the wrong enemy. They were fighting each other. They were fighting the ally. You know, this is exactly what the devil wants us to do. The devil wants us to destroy our own families. The devil wants us to destroy our own marriages, destroy our friendships, come against and fight our churches. The devil wants us to destroy our own nation. Look at it right now. We are living in a nation that is at odds with itself more than anybody else because The devil has caused us to get confused, and there's chaos and there's disorder because people are in this fog of war. The devil does this by causing frustration and confusion, and then we begin to fight the wrong things, fight the wrong people. In Proverbs 16, verse 28, it says, a dishonest man spreads strife, and a whisperer separates close friends. This is talking about a person who is going to people who he's supposed to be helping and protecting, and he's causing division. By words, by actions, there's a separation that's taking place. You know, as Christians, we need to be able to recognize the tricks or the wiles of the devil that's at work. Our text said that. The devil has things that he's at work actively doing to try to confuse us and to try to cause us to fight the wrong battles. You know, the whole aim of the enemy is to separate you and I from the people of God and to put our lives in a place where we are no longer able to receive the help and the support necessary to be built up, but we're isolated, just being torn down. In 2 Corinthians 12:20, it says, for I fear that perhaps when I come, I may find you not as I wish. Perhaps there may be quarreling, jealousy, anger, hostility, slander, gossip, conceit, and disorder. So here, Paul, he's writing to the Corinthian church, and he's saying, I'm genuinely concerned that when I get to that church, I'm going to find a group of people that's just fighting themselves. That they're breaking apart and tearing down what God has brought together. And you know, that's happening in this church in Corinth, but that happens every day in families, in relationships, in friendships. In verse 12 of our text, God shows us the first step to overcoming that confusion, and that is to recognize that we are in a battle not against flesh and blood. You see, a lot of times we get focused on the wrong thing, right? You're having a bad day, things aren't going right, so you come home and take it out on your family, right? That's the wrong battlefield. You're fighting the wrong things. It's not the way that God wanted it to be. You're in the middle, you're in the throes of it, right? There's disagreements with your spouse, issues with your family members, there's problems with coworkers. It's not about the toilet seat being left up or the trash not being taken out or the unfair workload that one person has to do more than the other. It's not about the way the money's being spent. Those are all valid issues. They are real things that we're going to face in life, but they're just the fruit on the tree. They're not the tree. They're not the roots that are down in the ground causing the problems. There's a bigger strategy that is at work. And we have to be able to say that there's an enemy, but it is not the people that are in my life. I want you to say this with me. They are not my enemy. And that's so very true, and it's so very important that you begin to recognize my children are not my enemy. Even though they're being disobedient, even though they're causing problems, my spouse is not my enemy. Even though we don't agree on this situation or how to handle this problem, my finances are not my enemy. It's just that we have to put some things in order and discipline ourselves a little bit. My coworkers, they are not my enemy. They're going through their own problems and struggles that they're bringing to work and taking out on me, and they don't understand. They're in the wrong. And so I need to be willing as a Christian to be gracious and merciful and forgiving. There are things that are going on in your life where you are fighting the wrong enemy. You're looking at it wrong because the devil, he's actively at work trying to accomplish that. This brings us thirdly to targeting and engaging the enemy. In a recent article by the Heritage Foundation, they were talking about cyber warfare and why it's so dangerous. You know, one of the things about cyber warfare is that you could actually be under attack or you could be being taken advantage of, a victim of cyber warfare, and not even know it. Someone could be stealing money out of your bank account and you have no clue that it's happening until one day you go and you try to buy something and there's nothing there for you to use because it's in North Korea. Because that's what's happening. You know, cyber warfare is like one of those areas, it's a battleground of the unseen. And this article, it goes on and says, no threat facing America is growing as fast or in the manner as difficult to understand as the danger from cyber attacks. The cyber threats to the U.S. interests are real, with Russia being the most sophisticated, followed closely by China and North Korea. To address this growing threat, the U.S. should leverage the forces of the market, motivating the private sector to make a sort of continual and dynamic investment needed to secure the country's diverse cyber networks. What this article is talking about is learning how to recognize the threats and recognize the weaknesses and then beginning to address them. As Christians, a lot of what we're battling with is unseen, but there are still things that we can look at and say, that is an attack. Someone is trying to tear me down, and it's not my spouse, it's not my kids, it's not my parents, it's not, you name the scenario, but there is an attack that is coming. I need to recognize that, and I need to begin to address it. So the first step to targeting and engaging the enemy and winning on the fields of life is that we must admit that we're in a battle to begin with. I mean, there's a lot of people that they just want that passive, happy-go-lucky life. Oh, I'm just going through life. I don't want to cause any problems. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to stir the pot. I want everything to be good and chill. But listen, you can't go through life like that. In our text, verse 11, it says, put on the whole armor of God. He's telling us to engage, to take a posture of readiness, a willingness to fight, to have a mindset and an attitude that is default aggressive. That, you know what, I'm not going to be passive with this. I'm not going to let somebody just come and take advantage of me. And I'm talking in the spiritual world. That devil, you don't have the right to treat me like this. I'm a child of God. And I'm going to be in this posture that I'm going to resist. I'm going to fight back. James 4 verse 7, it tells us to resist the devil because when we resist him, he will flee from you. So you must understand that you can't let your guard down. You have to be willing to be on point. You have to be willing to be prepared to do business and to go to battle. My wife, she read me an article yesterday about a man. He was here from Argentina just a few days ago. It was up in the Florida, Panama City here in Florida. And as he was there, he was kind of down by the beach, just kind of doing his thing. And he begins to catch word that there were some swimmers that got sucked out in the rip current just right on the beach, right by where he was. And so the man, he's a lifeguard in Argentina. But he's here on vacation in Florida. He goes to his car and he gets his life-saving tube. Like this guy's carrying his tool to swim out in water and save lives while he's on vacation. So he hears that these swimmers are being caught in the rip current and pulled out. He runs to his car. He grabs his tool, the flotation device, and he goes out and he sees where they are being pulled out into the water and he swims out. He's thinking there are 2 or possibly 3 people. When he gets out there, he finds that there are 7 people that have been pulled out in the rip current. And he takes the most, desperate, tired, wore out one, and he grabs them and he brings them into shore and he begins to gather boogie boards and other flotation devices and he brings them back out 200 yards off. He takes them back. He rescued all 7 people by himself. Why? Because he had a posture of readiness. He said, I'm not just going to go on vacation. Right? There's a lot of times as Christians where we want to just check out. I want to just go on vacation. Why do I got to go to church today, man? Listen, there's danger. There's a rip current. And it will take you somewhere. And it will destroy life. It will destroy destiny. It will destroy future. You have to have a spiritual posture of, I am not going to let up. I am not just going to let something take me out to sea. I'm not going to let my life just drift. But I'm going to be ready and prepared. I'm going to be at war. I'm at war, man. We're in the battle. 1 Peter 5, verse 8, it says, be sober-minded. And we could say as Christians, be sober. Right? Because I want to just take a vacation. I'm having a bad day, man. What's the problem with cracking a few open? Be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, is seeking someone to devour. That's the problem. When we let our guard down, when we just say, you know what, I'm going to take a vacation in the spiritual, in the heart issues, there is a real enemy. And he's looking for someone to destroy. You know, God wants us to pay attention and be willing to take action. The second step of winning life's battles is to identify and target the enemy. Not the person that's there to help you. Not the church that is designed to be a place where you can go and find rest and sanctuary and hope, right? That's not the enemy. The enemy is the one that's trying to destroy. Some people are dying on the wrong battlefields because they're fighting their spouse, their family, their friends, their coworkers. They're fighting themselves, focusing on situations and problems that they will never have answers to. In Judges chapter 12, the people of God were at war with an enemy. And the enemy was trying to infiltrate and trying to get into the land and use, some subtlety and do some subterfuge. And it came to this test where, how do we know who the enemy is? And they actually came up with it because their enemy spoke a little bit of a different language than them, and they weren't able to say the word shibboleth correctly. And so this was the test. How do I know if you're for me or against me? Can you say the word shibboleth correctly? And if they couldn't pronounce it correctly, arrested, straight to jail. And it's interesting because they used a test to determine who was the enemy and who was the friend. You know, a lot of times everybody's the enemy. I'm going through it right now, so everybody's the enemy. But that's not the case in life. Nine times out of 10, there's one enemy and he's fighting against you. So you need to learn to focus on that and say, you know what? The devil is real and I'm going to resist him. When Jesus and Peter were having the interaction and Peter was telling Jesus, you're not going to go to the cross and die for my sins, he didn't rebuke Peter. He said, get behind me, Satan. Right? So he was able to distinguish between Peter and the demonic that was speaking through Peter. Yes, the devil will use people, but that person is not your enemy. They may not even realize that they're being used as a tool. So don't fight that person, but fight the enemy. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. So let's close with this, the unconventional warfare side of this. The third way for us to overcome is that we must fight God's way and not our way. Prayer is supernatural. Prayer is powerful. Prayer is both offensive and defensive. Prayer builds the defenses that we need to both guard our lives and the lives of the people that we're praying for. Are you praying for your spouse? Are you praying for your coworkers? Are you praying for your church? Are you praying for your children? Are you praying for your parents? This is building the defense. Prayer takes the posture of faith that resists the enemy, and it steps out in faith. Hebrews 11, by faith, Abraham believed God. David, he picked up the stones and walked onto the battlefield against Goliath by faith in 1 Samuel 17. Jonathan and his armor bearer, they decided to move towards the Philistines, which had the high ground. They decided, I'm going to climb this cliff by faith in 1 Samuel 14 to see what God will do. And by faith, they decided to make a move in the direction that God wanted them to go. But that's what prayer does. Prayer gets us into that direction of faith. Forgiveness is another tool that's unconventional warfare in the things of God. You know, it is offensive because the devil wants to fill your hearts with anger. It's defensive because it's the best way to protect your life from long-term bitterness. God, I'm just going to forgive and I'm going to let go. That is spiritual warfare. Forgiveness, mercy, grace, that is allowing God to move. The final thing that we can do as far as spiritual warfare is fasting. You know, it's offensive because it engages God. It shows God that we are fully committed into what God wants to do with our lives and getting out of situations. Ezra 8:23 says, so we fasted and entreated or asked our God for this, and he answered our prayers. When they prayed and fasted, when the two were put together, things began to change. They had a need and only God could supply the answer. So they said, God, I'm getting out of the way. When you're fasting, you're weak. You're putting yourself out of the way so that God can help. In Isaiah 58 verse 6, it says, is this not the fast that I have chosen? So God's asking them, think about this. I told you to fast, but then he goes on to give the purpose. He said, to loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and that you break off every yoke. So God's saying, I'm challenging you to fast so that all of these things can be removed and broken off of your life and you can have freedom. Fasting changes the spiritual climate. It triggers the supernatural. Acts 13:2, while they were worshiping the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work that which I have called them to. So in this, spiritual clarity, spiritual direction was given as a result of fasting and prayer. This morning, some of you are sitting here and you are on a battlefield. You're in the fog of war. You're going through things. There's pressure that is on your life. There are things pulling at your heart. There is heavy weights that are causing you. There's waves of doubt and fear that are beating against your life. I could describe it in 100 different ways. You know when you're in the middle of the battle. And I want to encourage you this morning that the answer is turning to God and fighting, resisting the devil, allowing God to get involved in your circumstances. God, I'm going to bring this to you. I don't have the answer. All I have is why. But God, I'm going to trust you. I don't know what the next step should be, but God, I'm going to allow you to guide and direct my life. And that's what fasting and prayer, the coupling of the two does. And then you throw on top of that, God, I just need to forgive some people. I need to let some things go. And allow God to break in. In our text, it says, for the reason of this, that we may be able to stand against the wiles of the enemy. And then it ends with having done all to stand. You know, a lot of people, they're in the middle of war, but they've never prayed. They've never fasted. They've never took the posture of, I'm going to let some things go and I'm going to trust God. And I want to encourage you this morning. Every 6 months, we have a fellowship fast throughout all of our churches. We have the last number I heard Pastor Greg Mitchell say last week, 3,780 or something like that, churches throughout the world. So as a fellowship fast, think about all of those churches represented, fasting and praying with the same heart at the same time, with the same purpose. Those people, just like you and I, going through the battle. And we're called to take it another level, to approach it a little bit differently. And I want to invite you over the next 3 days to fast and pray with us. That you would say, you know what, God, I'm tired of dealing with these same issues over and over and over again. I need the bonds of wickedness to be loosed. I need the heaviness of these burdens to be undone off of my life. God, I need to be free of the oppression that's on my soul. God, I want to have the yoke that is holding me back broken off. I want to be delivered. And I want to encourage you, come to God in prayer and fasting and seeking His face and see how God changes your situation, how God begins to give you the victory on those battlefields of life. This morning, are you facing some difficulties? Are you in the throes of it? Are there things going on that you just can't explain or understand? Bring them to God and see how God helps you. Man, let's bow our heads this morning out of respect of God and those around you. You're here.